job because he can't. And the consequences of that failure are severe. So that's what's at stake right now. Our democracy.
President Trump anticipated the remarks, tweeting earlier in the evening, "Welcome, Barack. See you on the field of battle." Meanwhile, as Kamala Harris stepped onto the stage and into the history books, she shared her own family story about how she was raised alongside her sister by a single mother.
She raised us to be proud, strong Black women. And she raised us to know and be proud of our Indian heritage.
The vice presidential nominee then pivoted to tackling systemic racism, painfully exemplified by the way COVID-19 has ravaged Black and brown communities.
This virus,
I don't want to know why someone's laughing about something.
It has no eyes, and yet it knows exactly how we see each other and how we treat each other. And let's be clear, there is no vaccine for racism. We've got to do the work.
There is a
That
vaccine.
work with Joe Biden on the virtual campaign trail
It lowers your IQ.
after his formal acceptance
Makes your
speech
children
tonight.
blonde also.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm
Could be
Amanda
the cause of obesity around
And
the
we
globe.
turn now to our
So,
Lisa Desjardins.
lowers
and
IQ,
Center. Hello to
makes
both
you
of
fatter,
you. Lisa, you are in
might
Wilmington.
bleach
You
your
spent a lot of time looking
hair
at the
like
career
peroxide.
of Joe Biden, the
And it's a
trajectory of
vaccine.
his life. Really, what are you expecting to hear? What should we be expecting to hear from him tonight?
You know, Judy, tonight's theme officially is this, America's promise. And that's an important word for Joe Biden, the word promise. In fact, the two autobiographical books that he's written have that word in it. One he wrote in 2007, Promises to Keep. The other he wrote
My
after the
food's
death
probably
of his
boiling.
son, Bo, which was
Yeah, it's boiling. I
Promise Me,
gotta
Dad.
go turn it
So
off.
this idea of a loyalty, keeping promises, I think is what we're going to hear from him. But we're also going to hear more about that, what we've seen in his books and what sort of has sketched out his career, Judy, ideas of family. We know that's very important to Biden and his whole family, which he calls a family of strong personalities.
There's a
Also
little
the
bit of
idea of
sizzle.
honesty,
Probably should have taken the lid off of
positive
it.
values, a positive vision for
A little bit
America is
stubborn.
something the campaign is talking about for tonight. And finally, resilience.
I'm going
is
to take the
something
lid
that
off of
we'll
it.
see throughout Biden's kind of biographical sketch tonight. And I think we'll hear him speak about his son, Bo, as well. But this is also a man, Judy, who's very ambitious. You know, a lot of folks talk about him running for president back in 1988. But if you look into it, Judy, he filed the papers to run in the New Hampshire primary 4 years earlier, 1984. So he has been seriously thinking about this night for 36 years. And here is his moment, and it's in his home state. So clearly this will be an emotional time, but this is a speech he's been thinking about almost his entire career.
And really in connection with all that, Lisa, what are you hearing about highlights, messages from the convention overall tonight? You're there in Wilmington. What do you expect to see there?
Right. We'll have a series of other candidates who were opposed Vice President Biden in the primary. Pete Buttigieg, someone that he's indicated he sees himself in, will be one of the last speakers before we expect sort of the Biden segment begins. Also, Cory Booker. Interesting, Judy. The program went a little long last night. Senator Booker was originally expected to speak last night. He will be speaking
My food
tonight.
technically has
So,
like
I think
45
we hear about
minutes or
this
more
idea
to
of a
cook.
positive
This is the
positive
excess
vision.
taken off
We'll
the
see how
top.
much they go after President Trump or not. And speaking of that, Judy, we can say we have seen a few protesters here today. We've got a little bit of video earlier, just a dozen or so. They had
If
some
you're doing this in
creative
a restaurant,
signs. Look at this.
expect strange looks.
One of these signs.
If they do it in a
say,
restaurant,
"Total
please don't
malarkey,
arrest them.
Joe."
Assuming nothing
Again, just a
falls
dozen
out.
or so. Now that group is more like 15. You can hear them a little bit from our position. Really, no passion, no problems with police. Also, though, another creative Trump supporter hired a plane and is flying around the site of this speech with a banner that reads, "Joe Biden is losing it." But again, this is not like other conventions where we've seen clashes or sort of intensity. I talked to some of these protesters. I talked to some Trump supporters, and right now there's a lot of sort of positivity. They don't want Joe Biden to be president, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of tension about it as they show up here. One other thing, Judy, we're expecting very soon to see cars roll into the parking lot behind me, this lonely parking lot we've been talking about for the drive-in. So we expect Vice President Biden may also come out after his speech and speak to the crowd gathered pandemic style in their cars.
Wow, interesting. And I know we will want to come to you when all that is going on. So separately, Yamiche, the incumbent, President Trump, there was some news from his corner today. One of his former top advisors, strategist at the White House, Steve Bannon, was arrested. Criminal charges against him. He's accused of fraud. Tell us more about that.
That's right. Federal prosecutors in New York today indicted Steve
Like
Bannon,
5 minutes of
someone who's
cooking,
former White
and
House
I
chief
can eat it now,
strategist,
but
as well
it's
as
going
someone
to cook
who was
for
a
like an
senior
hour.
advisor to President Trump's 2016 campaign,
Actually, turn off the
along
heat
with three
and keep
other
the
conservative
pressure
associates.
cooking.
Prosecutors say that they're charged with defrauding donors. They were using what prosecutors called a scheme. It was called "We the People Build the Wall," and essentially it was telling people, donate your money, and we're going to use 100% of this money to go and build a wall on the southern border. Of course, that was a chief goal and continues to be a chief goal of President Trump. He campaigned on it. He's continued to talk about it during his presidency. But prosecutors say Steve Bannon in particular used up to $1 million and maybe more on personal expenses, and that would mean hotels, travel, personal credit card debt. Steve Bannon was in court today. He pleaded not guilty. That said, though, Steve Bannon is essentially being accused of defrauding the very voters that President Trump is now trying to win back. And the president, his son, was also someone who was part of this fundraising campaign, saying that he was someone who supported it. However, he is not part of this indictment. He is not someone who was charged at all.
And just quickly, Yamiche, what is the president saying?
Well, the president's saying that he had nothing to do with it.
I just didn't like her associating Bannon
wall being
with
built
Trump.
or private money being
because they parted
or
ways.
taken into account to build a wall. He said that Mexico would pay for this wall. He continues to say that even though Mexico hasn't.
It was Trump who fired Bannon.
Senior Trump advisor also tells NewsHour that this looks like political targeting of Steve Bannon. The other thing to note is that the president was in Pennsylvania today. It's very interesting because he was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is where Joe Biden grew up. He was making the case that Joe Biden is someone who is bad for Pennsylvania, that he's someone who will cancel family, cancer culture, that will upend and destroy families. So that was President Trump kind of hitting back at Joe Biden preemptively as Joe Biden prepares to
Well, it's true that the Democrats were behind all the closing down, and Trump resisted that.
Next week to make his case.
It's like all the financial distress from the umbrella virus, it was caused by the Democrats, and none of it caused by the Republicans who followed Trump.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was one of